This story begins with a series of calculated kidnappings, each more horrific and chilling than the last. When officers stormed the house, they found not only a woman screaming, but also a truly horrific scene. What they uncovered sent shockwaves through the police force and throughout the country. It was a story that spoke of brutality without bounds, violence against women that defied imagination. Dear viewers, liking, commenting, and subscribing only takes a few seconds, but it means so much to us. Every click and comment fuels our passion. Thanks. Michelle Knight was born on April 23, 1981, in Cleveland, Ohio. Her early life was marked by significant challenges, particularly with her family dynamics, which were often strained and tumultuous. Michelle grew up in a household that faced economic struggles, and her family environment was not always stable or supportive. Her experiences in this setting left her feeling isolated and misunderstood, leading her to occasionally run away in search of peace and safety elsewhere. Because of her troubled upbringing, Michelle's teenage years were difficult. She grappled with feelings of loneliness, abandonment, and a need for acceptance. Known as a resilient yet guarded person, Michelle built up walls to protect herself and grew accustomed to handling life's obstacles on her own. Although she sometimes found herself in trouble with the police due to her runaway attempts, Michelle was not a rebellious person at heart. Rather, she was a survivor who adapted to adversity in her own way. In her early 20s, Michelle became a mother to a son she deeply loved. Unfortunately, due to her unstable living situation and limited financial resources, she struggled to provide a stable home for her child. Ultimately, she lost custody, and her son was temporarily placed in a shelter. This loss deeply impacted Michelle, but her love for him continued to serve as a source of motivation and strength through the many hardships she would go on to face. Despite her struggles, Michelle possessed an inner strength that would later reveal itself in unimaginable ways. She had a reserved but kind personality, often described by those who knew her as someone who had an unusual depth, a testament to her lived experiences and resilience. Amanda Berry was born on April 22, 1986 in Cleveland, Ohio. Growing up in a modest but close and loving family, she shared her childhood with her mother, Luana, and an older sister with whom she was very close. Amanda's mother played a central role in her life, providing her with emotional support and a foundation of love and stability. Their bond was exceptionally strong. Amanda often described her mother as her best friend and confidant. With a kind-hearted, compassionate, and warm personality, Amanda was known for her positive outlook and ability to connect with others effortlessly. She was the type of person who would go out of her way to help those in need, whether by lending a listening ear or offering a comforting presence. As a teenager, Amanda was driven and ambitious, striving to succeed academically while balancing a part-time job at a local Burger King. Her coworkers respected and adored her, recognizing her as a diligent and friendly presence in the workplace. Her commitment to work and family, coupled with her sincere care for those around her, left a lasting impression on everyone who met her. Amanda's thoughtful nature and infectious optimism made her a cherished member of her community. She dreamed of a bright future and was dedicated to making her mother proud, both in her academic pursuits and personal growth. Her close-knit family and unwavering loyalty to friends painted a picture of a young woman who valued relationships deeply and had high hopes for what lay ahead. Gina DeJesus, known as Gina, was born on February 13, 1990, in Cleveland, Ohio. She was raised in a proud, close-knit Puerto Rican family on the city's west side. Family was the cornerstone of Gina's life, and she grew up surrounded by love and support from her parents, siblings, and extended family. The DeJesus household was lively and filled with warmth, with strong cultural values that emphasized togetherness, respect, and kindness. Gina was a cheerful, spirited teenager with a remarkable sense of empathy and compassion. Known for her vibrant personality, she was a social and approachable young girl who had an innate ability to make friends and spread joy wherever she went. Gina's best friend, Arlene, was an especially significant figure in her life, and the two were nearly inseparable. They often walked home from school together, sharing stories, dreams, and laughter along the way. Her strong sense of community and family values made her beloved by all who knew her. As a teenager, Gina looked forward to the future with excitement and curiosity, eager to explore the world and make her own mark. Her dreams and aspirations painted the picture of a young woman full of hope, optimism, and potential. But what lay ahead for these three girls was unimaginable. A chilling event was about to take place. Ariel Castro was born on July 10, 1960, in Yauco, Puerto Rico, into a struggling family. His parents, Liliana Rodriguez and Pedro Castro, were raising 4 children. Ariel, his 2 brothers O'Neill and Pedro, and his sister Bonita on meager earnings. The household was marred by financial hardship and constant conflict between his parents. Tensions escalated, and by the time Ariel was ready for school, his parents had divorced. The separation left Liliana as the sole provider for her children, a role she took on with little to no resources. Driven by desperation, Liliana decided to move her family to the United States, hoping for a fresh start and greater opportunities. Their first stop was Reading, a city in southeastern Pennsylvania, where they stayed briefly before heading west to Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland, which had a growing Latino community, seemed to offer hope, as well as a sense of belonging for migrants. Life in Cleveland was challenging but offered more stability than they had known in Puerto Rico. Pedro Castro, Ariel's father, also moved to Cleveland with his new wife and children settling nearby. Although Liliana allowed her children to remain in contact with their father, he rarely offered any financial support. Despite their difficult situation, Ariel attended Lincoln West High School and participated in local activities, including music, which became an outlet for him. He graduated from high school in 1978 and was known to be a model church-going Christian, often accompanying his family to services. However, under this veneer of a typical young man, Ariel displayed a darker side that hinted at his future behavior. Even as a teenager, he exhibited signs of controlling and aggressive tendencies, especially with his siblings. Those who knew him during this time recall that while Ariel could present himself as polite and respectful in public, he often acted as a domestic tyrant at home. These traits only intensified as he grew older and developed relationships outside the family. It was during his teenage years that he met Grimilda Figueroa, a young girl who lived across the street. The two quickly bonded. They attended the same high school, shared friends, and soon began a romantic relationship. Despite their mutual affection, Ariel's possessiveness started to show early on. He closely monitored Grimilda's interactions with others and became upset if he felt she was spending too much time with friends or family. As the couple matured, they continued living with their respective families due to financial constraints. In the early 1990s, however, they saved enough to rent their own place, a 2-story house on Seymour Avenue in southwest Cleveland. The house, built in 1890, had undergone multiple reconstructions over the years, but still retained much of its original structure, including 4 bedrooms, a dining room, 1 bathroom, and a large, unfinished basement. Despite the excitement of having their own space, the move marked the beginning of a turbulent period in Grimilda's life. Once they were living together, Ariel's abusive tendencies began to escalate. He subjected Grimilda to both emotional and physical abuse, frequently berating her, isolating her from friends, and using violence to assert control. Grimilda hoped that marriage and children would soften Ariel's behavior, but her optimism was met with a harsh reality as the abuse only worsened. Grimilda tried to keep her suffering hidden from those around her, concealing bruises under her clothing and making excuses for visible injuries. Her family noticed her growing withdrawn and periodic signs of physical abuse, but Grimilda stubbornly kept her abuse a secret, hoping that things would get better with time. Then, in 1993, Ariel's violence reached a new peak. In a fit of rage, he pushed Grimilda down the stairs, causing severe injuries that required medical intervention. She was admitted to the hospital with fractured ribs, a broken nose, and broken arms. Despite the severity of her injuries, Grimilda refused to file a police report, fearing both Ariel's reaction and the stigma surrounding domestic abuse at the time. Her silence allowed Ariel to evade consequences, and once she returned home, he quickly resumed his abusive behavior. Realizing that he could continue his actions without facing repercussions, Ariel's abuse grew more frequent and intense. From a young age, Ariel was both manipulative and adept at hiding his darker tendencies. People in the community who knew him during this period saw him as quiet and sometimes even charming, unaware of the turmoil he was causing at home. While he maintained an outward image of respectability, particularly by attending church and involving himself in social gatherings, Ariel led a life that sharply contrasted with the facade he presented. As he aged, Ariel's controlling nature expanded into other aspects of his life. He kept Grimilda isolated, ensuring she had limited contact with her family and friends, which deepened her dependence on him and intensified her sense of entrapment. Although Ariel worked a stable job as a school bus driver in the Cleveland area, his life with Grimilda was anything but stable. At home, Ariel would often use his financial control over her to reinforce his dominance, making her feel trapped and helpless. Even when he was not overtly violent, Ariel kept Grimilda in a constant state of fear and submission, leaving her with little room to assert herself or seek help. Over time, Ariel's abusive tendencies became known to some close friends and family members of Grimilda, but they were largely powerless to intervene due to her unwillingness to report him. In public, Ariel maintained his reputation, blending in with Cleveland's growing Hispanic community, where he could easily hide his abusive behavior behind a carefully curated image. His involvement with his extended family, particularly his siblings from his father's second marriage, also reinforced this facade. In this larger family setting, Ariel could appear jovial and engaged, further obscuring the dark reality of his home life with Grimilda. In the mid-1990s, Ariel Castro's abusive behavior escalated to horrifying levels, culminating in an incident where he inflicted a serious head injury on Grimilda Figueroa. The trauma led to the formation of a blood clot, which eventually developed into an inoperable tumor that would impact Grimilda's health for the remainder of her life. Despite the severity of this assault, Ariel was only briefly detained by authorities. Just a day after his arrest, he was released when Grimilda, once again, declined to press charges and pleaded for his release. Her fear of Ariel and reluctance to involve the law kept her locked in a cycle of abuse and control, unable to break free or secure long-term protection. Ariel's brief arrest served as no deterrent. Instead, it reinforced his belief that he could continue to terrorize Grimilda with impunity. Toward the late 1990s, however, Grimilda found the courage to leave. Exhausted by years of violence and fearing for her life and the safety of her children, she finally filed for divorce, taking their 4 children. She was granted custody, offering her children a chance at a new beginning away from their abusive father. Yet her nightmare did not end with her departure. Ariel continued to pursue Grimilda, threatening her and attempting to manipulate her into returning to him. His relentless harassment forced her to seek legal recourse, and she was granted a restraining order, which she had to renew 3 times. Despite her efforts to protect herself and her family, Grimilda's health deteriorated significantly in the following years, and she passed away in April 2012. Her death was a tragic consequence of the long-term trauma inflicted by Ariel. Her brain tumor, a result of the repeated abuse, had led to severe complications. By the time of her passing, her children had reached adulthood and were no longer under Ariel's control, each one now navigating their own life. In August 2002, Ariel's sinister urges came to the fore in a terrifying manner when he orchestrated the abduction of his first victim, Michelle Knight. It is uncertain how long Ariel had been planning to kidnap someone, but on that fateful day, he seized an opportunity. Michelle, a 21-year-old woman with a troubled past, was walking to a court appointment concerning the custody of her young son. Ariel, a familiar face from the neighborhood, drove up to her and offered her a ride, which Michelle accepted, not sensing any danger. Ariel played on her trust, telling her he had recently adopted puppies and needed help finding them homes. Thinking she was simply helping a neighbor, Michelle agreed to go to his house to see the puppies. As soon as she crossed the threshold of his home, Ariel's demeanor shifted from friendly to frighteningly aggressive. Once inside, he brutally attacked Michelle, physically overpowering her and subjecting her to repeated acts of violence and assault. After assaulting her, he bound her hands and took her to his basement, chaining her to prevent any chance of escape. The basement, which Ariel had prepared with disturbing forethought, became Michelle's prison. Over the following days, he subjected her to starvation, withholding both food and water, while continuing to assault her and enforce his control through physical violence. In the early days of her captivity, Michelle endured unimaginable suffering. Her pleas for freedom went unanswered, and Ariel showed no remorse or intention of releasing her. She was stripped of her autonomy, forced into a life of submission under Ariel's control. The calculated cruelty he displayed, depriving her of basic needs, isolating her and maintaining her in a state of constant fear, highlighted the darkness that had been growing within him for years. Michelle's abduction marked the beginning of a horrifying chapter in Ariel Castro's life, one that would eventually expose his capacity for manipulation, violence, and inhumanity. When Michelle Knight disappeared in 2002, her mother immediately went to the police, hoping for a swift response. But Michelle's case was not prioritized, and officials showed little urgency in searching for her. Years later, law enforcement would admit that they had allocated minimal resources to her case due to several prejudiced assumptions. First, Michelle was an adult, unlike the many missing minors who automatically garnered more attention. Second, she had a history of running away and was involved in a custody dispute over her young son, which led officers to dismiss her disappearance as possibly voluntary or even a tactic to avoid court proceedings. Additionally, Michelle had minor legal troubles, which, in the eyes of the authorities, further reduced her case's perceived importance. Michelle's family, unwilling to give up, launched their own efforts to find her. With support from friends and neighbors, they distributed flyers and posted missing person notices around the city, hoping for any lead that could bring her back. Ironically, Ariel Castro even joined in these efforts to help, placing flyers with Michelle's photo around town, while she remained imprisoned in his basement, enduring unimaginable suffering. Over time, Ariel grew increasingly confident that the police did not suspect him. Convinced he had evaded suspicion, Castro felt emboldened to act again, which led to the horrifying events of 2003. On April 21, 2003, nearly a year after Michelle's disappearance, Ariel set his sights on another victim, 16-year-old Amanda Berry. Amanda, also from Cleveland, was well known and loved in her community. She was a hard-working high school student who balanced her studies with a job at a nearby Burger King. That evening, Amanda called her sister after her shift to let her know she would be home soon. But Amanda never arrived, and her family's world was turned upside down when she failed to come home that night. As Amanda walked to her usual bus stop after her shift, Ariel Castro pulled up beside her and offered her a ride. Amanda knew Ariel. He was a familiar face, as his son had been in her class for several years. Without hesitation, Amanda accepted his offer, believing she was safe. Ariel skillfully gained her trust by asking for her help, saying he needed assistance with something at his home. But once Amanda stepped into his house, her fate mirrored Michelle's. Ariel locked the doors, and his demeanor instantly transformed into one of cold hostility. He violently attacked Amanda, physically overpowering her, and dragged her to the basement where Michelle was still held captive. Ariel subjected Amanda to similar abuse, starving her for days and ensuring she had no strength to resist. Trapped in the basement, Amanda became Ariel's second prisoner in a house that now concealed 2 lives extinguished by captivity and terror. Curiously, despite the similarities in Michelle's and Amanda's disappearances and their proximity in both time and location, no connection was made between the 2 cases. Amanda's disappearance, however, attracted much more attention. Unlike Michelle, Amanda was an active high school student with no record or history of running away. Her family was adamant that she would never simply leave without informing anyone, and they were quick to launch a massive search campaign. The local media soon picked up her story, and it spread nationally, elevating her case to one of the most prominent missing persons investigations in the United States. Her mother, Luana Miller, appeared on numerous popular TV shows, including The Oprah Winfrey Show and The Montel Williams Show, pleading for help and urging anyone with information to come forward. The Berry family's search for Amanda took a distressing turn when a notorious psychic, Sylvia Brown, appeared on one of these shows and, after examining Amanda's photo, declared that Amanda had died. Brown claimed that her body rested in water, a pronouncement that devastated Amanda's family. Though heartbroken by this pronouncement, Luana Miller remained steadfast, continuing the search for her daughter until her own tragic passing in 2006 from heart complications, perhaps exacerbated by the unbearable grief of losing Amanda. Luana's tireless dedication, however, continued to inspire Amanda's remaining family members, who refused to give up hope. Years later, in 2012, a convict named Robert Wolford confessed to Amanda's supposed murder. He claimed he knew the location of her body and was prepared to lead police to it. In a high-profile operation, authorities combed through a vacant lot on Cleveland's west side based on Wolford's directions. The search was exhaustive, with teams digging and using advanced equipment to try and locate Amanda's remains, but they found nothing. After weeks of fruitless efforts, it was revealed that Wolford had lied, hoping to gain attention and a moment in the spotlight. His actions led to further heartbreak for Amanda's family, who had been clinging to any possible lead. For his deception, Wolford was sentenced to an additional 5 years in prison, but the damage he had caused lingered painfully for Amanda's family. As Amanda's case received more publicity, she was officially classified among the most wanted missing teens in America. Her family's search never waned, and her face became a symbol of both tragedy and resilience. Posters, billboards, and television ads kept her story alive in the public's memory, and Cleveland's residents knew her name and face, fueling an enduring collective hope that Amanda would one day return home. Ariel Castro's life seemed unremarkable to his neighbors despite these horrors unfolding in his basement. His outward appearance as a helpful and friendly individual remained unshaken. Neighbors recalled him as generous, hosting backyard barbecues, playing music, and participating in community events. The fact that he lived alone after Grimilda had left him did not seem unusual to them, nor did his reluctance to invite anyone inside his home arouse suspicion. It was not uncommon for people in the neighborhood to think of him as eccentric, a slightly peculiar man who kept to himself but was ultimately harmless. In the house on Seymour Avenue, however, a different reality unfolded. Ariel had designed a method of holding his victims captive without drawing attention. He kept his blinds closed, restricted their movements to avoid noise, and carefully managed when he left the house to ensure he could constantly monitor his captives. Inside those walls, Michelle and Amanda endured a life of terror and deprivation, subjected to a daily routine of physical, emotional, and psychological abuse. Ariel controlled every aspect of their lives, denying them autonomy, freedom, and hope. These first years of captivity marked the beginning of a hellish ordeal that would eventually produce a third victim. The third victim of Ariel Castro's horrific crimes was 14-year-old Gina DeJesus, who had grown up in the same neighborhood and attended the same school as Castro's daughter, Arlene. Gina and Arlene were best friends, so when Castro spotted Gina on April 2, 2004, he seized the opportunity to lure her into his car. The girls had just left school, walking and chatting as usual before they parted ways to head home. As Gina made her way down West 105 Street, Castro approached, claiming he would drive her home. She knew him well. He was, after all, her best friend's father. With no reason to be suspicious, Gina accepted the ride, unaware that this ordinary act of trust would trap her in a nightmare. The kidnapping happened in broad daylight, yet the street was eerily deserted, leaving no witnesses to report the incident. Though her family fought for attention to her disappearance, their pleas initially went unanswered. Desperate to spread awareness, Gina's story eventually aired on America's Most Wanted in hopes of uncovering any leads. The broadcast aired twice more, in 2005 and 2006, fueling suspicions that Gina's kidnapping could be linked to Amanda Berry's disappearance, which had occurred just 1 year prior. Despite the show's broad reach and Gina's well-known connection to Castro's daughter, Ariel Castro managed to avoid suspicion. Disturbingly, Castro even volunteered to help search for the missing girls, using his close ties to the community to shield himself from scrutiny. At one point, a witness described a man who resembled Castro as a person of interest in Gina's disappearance, leading to a police sketch. The image bore a striking similarity to Castro, yet somehow he was still not considered a suspect. The 3 girls were now Castro's captives, trapped in a hellish existence behind the walls of his seemingly ordinary Cleveland home. Over the next decade, they would be subjected to unimaginable torment, confined to small, locked rooms and stripped of any freedom. Castro frequently beat, assaulted, and deprived them of food as a method to exert control. His approach to maintaining power was especially cruel. Any sign of resistance or an attempt to escape would result in severe punishment. He sought to crush their spirit, making escape seem impossible and enforcing a regime of complete dependency and isolation. Michelle Knight, the first of his victims and the eldest, endured the worst of Castro's cruelty. He often singled her out for harsh beatings and psychological abuse. When she dared to disobey, he orchestrated punishments that he would carry out in front of Amanda and Gina, a brutal display meant to instill fear in them and deter any rebellion. Michelle suffered multiple forced miscarriages over the years. At least 5 times she became pregnant, only for Castro to cruelly terminate each pregnancy. His method was barbaric. He would beat and starve her until her body could no longer sustain the child. On one occasion, the miscarriage left Michelle in such severe pain and bleeding that she was close to death. But Castro ignored her pleas for medical assistance, leaving her to endure the agony alone. In time, the girls were moved from the dark, damp basement where they had been initially held to a small, locked room on the 2nd floor. Though they were technically upgraded to the room, their conditions hardly improved. Castro continued to control every aspect of their lives, denying them access to basic needs as punishment and using these privileges to manipulate their behavior. Baths or showers were rare and served as a reward for obedience rather than a necessity. The girls were made to use a garden bucket as their toilet, which Castro seldom emptied. He fed them minimally, usually 1 meal a day, keeping them weak, dependent, and less likely to resist. Castro occasionally tried to manipulate the captives with small gestures, like the time he gave them a puppy. But his moments of generosity were twisted, as he used the puppy as another tool of control. A week after giving it to them, he brutally killed the puppy in front of the girls as punishment for Michelle's defiance. This act further traumatized them, proving that any attachment they developed could be shattered by Castro's wrath. In 2006, Amanda discovered she was pregnant. Terrified, she dreaded that Castro would react violently and force another miscarriage. But to her shock, he allowed her to carry the pregnancy to term. In a rare display of twisted paternal pride, Castro prepared for the birth by purchasing an inflatable pool for Amanda to use as a makeshift birthing tub. In December of that year, Amanda gave birth to a daughter, whom she named Joselyn. Although the baby was born frail, she managed to survive in the captive conditions. The child's presence brought a glimmer of hope and purpose to the lives of the captives. Amanda, Gina, and Michelle poured their limited energy into caring for Joselyn, finding brief reprieve from the horror of their own circumstances. For the girls, the baby became a source of comfort and connection, a small life to protect and cherish. Castro, in his twisted mindset, viewed Joselyn as a testament to his control and took pride in the child he had fathered. He provided Joselyn with slightly better living conditions than those endured by the captives, even allowing her access to toys and occasionally bringing her outside into the backyard. The appearance of Joselyn also changed how the girls interacted with Castro. They remained fearful, yet they used Joselyn's safety as leverage, cautious of their behavior to avoid drawing Castro's ire and putting her at risk. Though the girls remained locked in captivity, Joselyn's presence offered moments of joy and normalcy. They watched her grow, taught her the alphabet, and tried to create an illusion of a normal life within the dark confines of Castro's home. Their shared care for Joselyn strengthened their bond and steeled their resolve to survive. Joselyn's curiosity and questions eventually became difficult for Castro to control, and he began to allow limited freedoms within the house. The captives were occasionally permitted to join him upstairs, where Joselyn lived, though he maintained strict restrictions to prevent them from escaping. Over time, Joselyn began to notice odd things, like why her mother and aunts could never leave the house, or why they were constantly fearful of making noise. In her innocent way, she questioned the rules that had become second nature to Amanda, Gina, and Michelle. These small cracks in Castro's control ultimately planted seeds of hope and courage in the women, who began to envision a way out. The captives found themselves fantasizing about freedom, gradually awakening to the possibility that Joselyn, a symbol of both Castro's power and their love, might be the very reason they could one day escape. They quietly observed and waited, hoping for any sign of an opportunity to escape. There were occasional attempts to flee, but each was thwarted, resulting in brutal consequences. Castro's careful management of every detail of their lives left them with little chance of escape. He believed he had full control, convinced that he could predict their every move. His arrogance would eventually lead to his downfall, however, as on May 6, 2013, he made a mistake that ultimately cost him his grip on his captives and his freedom. On that fateful day, Castro left the house in a rush and, uncharacteristically, forgot to lock one of the interior doors. Amanda seized this rare opportunity, quietly moving to a window facing the street. From there, she saw a neighbor walking by and began banging and shouting for help, hoping against hope that someone would hear her. The man paused, initially unsure of what he was witnessing, but Amanda's desperate actions led him to stop. Another neighbor soon joined, and together they decided to call emergency services. Determined to help, they managed to break the lock on the front door, freeing Amanda and Joselyn. As police arrived, Amanda identified herself, recounting her abduction 10 years prior and revealing the existence of 2 other captives still trapped inside. Law enforcement swiftly entered the house, rescuing Gina and Michelle, who were overwhelmed with relief at their sudden liberation. Amanda, Joselyn, and Gina were found to be in stable health, though malnourished. Michelle, however, bore the deepest scars, both physical and psychological. Years of captivity had left her with hearing loss, partial blindness, and numerous improperly healed fractures that would require surgical intervention. Her mental trauma was even more profound, resulting from a decade of violent beatings, forced miscarriages, and relentless psychological abuse. Just an hour after police responded to Amanda's escape, Castro was apprehended in a McDonald's parking lot. At first, authorities detained his 2 brothers, O'Neill and Pedro, due to suspicions of involvement. These suspicions arose because of their regular presence at Ariel's home. But they were soon released after the captives confirmed that neither had any role in the kidnappings. Ariel Castro faced a lengthy list of charges, including kidnapping, assault, battery, rape, unlawful imprisonment, and 5 counts of aggravated murder for causing the deaths of Michelle's unborn children. Given the gravity of his crimes, prosecutors sought the death penalty for Castro, arguing that he was among the most cold-blooded criminals they had ever encountered. Castro, however, chose to avoid the death penalty by pleading guilty in exchange for a life sentence without parole. During the trial, Castro displayed a disturbing willingness to recount his crimes in vivid detail, describing the methods he used to capture and control the girls. He seemed almost detached from the pain he inflicted, casting blame on his victims for the circumstances that led them into his captivity. In his view, he argued, they were naive to accept rides from a stranger, shifting accountability away from his own monstrous actions. His defense strategy further shocked observers, as Castro claimed he was not a criminal but a sick man, even apologizing to the girls in a hollow attempt at remorse. He concluded his testimony with accusations that the police and FBI had failed the victims, claiming they were right under their noses the entire time. On August 1, 2013, Ariel Castro was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 1,000 years for the crimes he committed. His sentencing brought a sense of closure to the girls and their families, who had endured years of unimaginable suffering and loss. Ariel Castro, the man responsible for their suffering, was transferred to the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio. He was placed under close supervision due to the notoriety of his crimes. But on September 3, 2013, just a month into his life sentence, guards found Castro hanging from a bedsheet in his cell. Efforts to revive him proved unsuccessful, and he was declared dead at age 53. The small, unassuming house where Ariel Castro carried out years of unimaginable cruelty and torture was demolished on August 7, 2013. In a quiet but symbolic ceremony, Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus' family members gathered to witness the end of the structure that had confined the 3 women for a decade. In a final display of his twisted perspective, Castro expressed regret over the demolition, claiming that the house held many happy memories for him, a grotesque statement that only underscored the disconnect between his perception and the reality of his crimes. After years of enduring unimaginable suffering, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus were finally able to begin lives of freedom. Just a few weeks after Castro's conviction, they released a heartfelt joint video on July 9, 2013, publicly thanking their community and supporters for the outpouring of kindness and solidarity they had received. Though united in their gratitude, the 3 women ultimately chose to go their separate ways after that single statement, each pursuing a different path to healing. Despite the strong bond they had formed in captivity, the painful memories tied to their shared experience may have contributed to their decision to move forward independently. Michelle Knight, who had suffered the most severe injuries during captivity, decided to reinvent herself by changing her name and relocating to escape public attention. Initially avoiding media, she later published a memoir, Finding Me, A Decade of Darkness, A Life Reclaimed, which shared her painful experiences and her journey toward healing.